I'm Jessica.
It was the morning of June 24th. I sat on the balcony of my resort suite, sipping coffee and enveloped in the ocean air and silence. At 9:37 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion detection alert. I opened the camera app and watched as the first van, labeled Elite Catering, rolled up. Two SUVs followed, and then my parents' car, my brother Ethan's Porsche, and his fiancée Lily's mother's Mercedes. My guards were already in their positions, and they didn't even open the gate. I watched as my father argued, his face red and his gestures wild. Lily was crying, Ethan was pacing in circles, and the wedding planner stood there, holding a clipboard and looking visibly flustered. Guests arrived in their finest attire, and the vendors were confused and annoyed. At 10:45, the police showed up. We had briefed them days ago. The officers reviewed the paperwork, spoke calmly to my family, and then stepped aside. There would be no wedding, no access to my property. As the afternoon wore on, people started to leave. The vendors packed up, and the planner stood by her car for nearly 10 minutes, talking on the phone with a shaking hand. At 5:30, the last vehicle drove away. One of my guards texted me, "All clear. Your father said, this isn't over." I closed the app and put down my phone. I didn't feel victorious or vindicated. I just felt a strange stillness, as if something inside me had finally solidified. This wasn't about getting back at them, it was about standing up for myself. It all started 9 years ago. I grew up in a family where my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were all about status and appearances. My younger brother Ethan, for years my junior, was their golden child. He could do no wrong, and every little thing he did was met with praise and rewards. I, on the other hand, could get straight A's, do all my chores, and put on a perfect smile at family gatherings, but it never seemed to matter. When I was in school, I discovered my passion for interior design. I would sketch renovation ideas in my notebooks during class and read design blogs in secret. I turned an old shed in our backyard into a cozy art studio, but my mother only complained about the mess, and my father didn't even notice. When it was time for college, I wanted to study interior design. My parents, however, had other plans. They thought it was a waste of time and pushed me to study business. I tried to compromise by double majoring, but they still weren't happy. Meanwhile, Ethan got a full ride scholarship to a prestigious university and could switch majors whenever he felt like it. After graduation, I managed to build a portfolio with real clients and real projects. I finally launched my own interior design firm, Jessica Design and Decor. I was so excited and thought my parents would be proud. I invited them to a fancy dinner at their favorite restaurant. But during the meal, my mother talked about a charity event. My father ordered as usual, and Ethan said nothing. When I finally told them about my new firm, my father just said, "That's a bad decision." Then he offered me a job at one of his friend's companies, as if he had already decided for me. When I refused, he disowned me. He said I was on my own, no family support, no use of the family name. My mother stayed silent, and Ethan looked away. I left my house keys on the table and walked out. That night, I cried at my friend Maya's place. It wasn't because I lost my family, it was because deep down I still hoped they would care about me. But by the next morning, I knew that illusion was gone. I started my business from scratch with a tiny rented office, an old laptop, and a few clients. The first year was tough. 2 of my clients suddenly canceled their projects, and I suspected my father had something to do with it. But I didn't give up. I redesigned a friend's cafe for free to show what I could do. I bartered my design services for office supplies, and even slept in my office to save money. Slowly, things started to turn around. A restaurant I designed got featured by a well-known food blogger, and my business took off. I was able to rent a bigger studio, and my waiting list grew. At 32, I found an old, abandoned Victorian house on the outskirts of the city. Most people saw a dilapidated building, but I saw potential. I used all my savings to buy it and spent the next few years renovating it. I learned plumbing and carpentry from online tutorials and fixed everything myself. I documented the whole process on my firm's blog, and people loved it. By the end, it was a beautiful home, a true reflection of my hard work and creativity. In the meantime, I found a new family. Maya and her husband invited me to every family gathering. Jake and Sarah, a couple who owned a local bookstore, became my close friends. They never asked me to prove myself. They just accepted me for who I was. Then, out of the blue, after 9 years of silence, my mother called last April. Her voice was as fake as ever, all sweet and syrupy. She told me that Ethan was getting married and that the original venue had a problem. She remembered an article about my house in a design magazine and thought it would be the perfect place for the wedding. I was shocked but didn't lose my temper. I told her I needed time to think. The next day, my father called, demanding that I agree right away. He said it was about family and that Ethan needed this. Ethan also called, saying Lily was really stressed and that her parents would cover all the costs and even pay me a fee. But he talked as if I was just a venue provider, not even considering that it was my home. Over the next few days, I got calls from my mother, the wedding planner, and even some relatives I hadn't heard from in years. They all pressured me to say yes. Then, I found out they had already sent out the invitations with my address and posted pictures of my house on social media without my permission. I also received an anonymous complaint about my business, alleging code violations. That night, I decided to draw a line. I sent an email to my parents, Ethan, Lily, and the wedding planner, clearly stating that I was declining their request. I said my property was not available as a venue and that any continued use of my address or likeness would be considered unauthorized. The response was immediate. My father called, furious, saying I was being ungrateful. Ethan and my mother sent me angry text messages, and Lily left a tearful voicemail. Some relatives even tried to mediate, but I stood my ground. They retaliated by filing more false complaints against my business and leaving 1-star reviews online. But I was prepared. I contacted my lawyer, issued cease and desist letters, and hired a private security company. I also booked a retreat and took precautions to protect my home. And that's how I ended up here, watching as my family's attempt to take over my home failed. 3 days after the non-existent wedding, I returned home. The house was just as I left it, a silent testament to my independence. In my mailbox were 3 letters. One from my mother, full of anger and accusations. One from Ethan, confused and hurt. And one from Lily, apologizing. I read them once and put them away, never to be opened again. Weeks passed and there were no lawsuits, no apologies. I let the silence speak for itself. Then came Thanksgiving. I hosted 20 people at my house, my real family. We sat around the table in the garden, sharing wine and stories. For the first time, I felt true connection, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love. I realized that family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up for you.